The store's freezer lights flickered in colors I'd never seen. At first I thought it was just another failing ballast. The place had plenty of those, old fluorescent tubes that buzzed like trapped insects and blinked themselves half to death before morning. The owner always said he'd replace them next week, which meant never. It was close to 2 in the morning, the hour when the road outside went silent and the refrigerators inside the store seemed to breathe louder to make up for it. The flicker came from the row of glass freezer doors along the back wall. Blue, then not blue. That was the only way I could describe it. The light shifted into a color that didn't belong to anything I'd ever seen before. Not purple, not green, not ultraviolet. It felt wrong the way a sour smell feels wrong before you recognize it as rot. I looked up from the register. The aisles were empty. The security mirror in the corner reflected the whole store in its warped, chrome bowl. Candy racks, dusty magazines, the humming soda cooler, and the freezers. The lights inside them blinked again. Blue, then that other color. For a second the frost on the glass doors looked deeper than it should have, like the ice had thickness, like there was distance behind it instead of shelves of frozen pizza. The hum of the compressors dipped lower, a mechanical throat clearing. I waited. Nothing else happened. Great, I muttered to no one. Another dying light. The hum resumed its steady drone. A car passed somewhere far down the road, tires hissing over wet pavement. The automatic door sensors clicked faintly as they adjusted to nothing moving. I went back to scrolling through my phone. A minute later the hum changed again. Not louder, just layered, like 2 identical notes slightly out of sync. I glanced back. The freezer lights flickered again. Blue, then that impossible color. But this time the shift lasted longer. The glass doors glowed faintly, as if something behind them was emitting the light rather than reflecting it. The frost patterns on the inside of the glass began to shimmer, like heat rippling above asphalt. I stood up. The movement felt heavier than it should have, as if the air between the aisles had thickened. The store smelled the same. Cleaner fluid, plastic packaging, faint burnt dust from the fluorescent lights, but something about the lighting had changed. The aisle shadows stretched strangely, bending toward the freezer wall like they were leaning. I stepped around the counter. The floor tiles clicked under my shoes. The sound echoed oddly, as if the store were larger than it looked. Halfway down the aisle, the hum of the freezers deepened again. Now there was a soft clicking inside it. Click, pause, click, almost rhythmic. I reached the freezer doors. The glass was cold enough to fog where my breath touched it. Inside, the pizzas and frozen dinners sat exactly where they should. Boxes stacked in neat rows, frost clinging to the metal shelves. But the light above them flickered again. Blue, then that color. When it appeared, the reflections on the glass changed. At first I thought it was just distortion from the frost. But then I realized the reflection of the store behind me wasn't lining up correctly. The aisles in the glass looked deeper than the real ones. The reflection of the counter seemed farther away. And my reflection, I leaned closer. My reflection leaned too, but not at the same speed, just slightly behind. The flicker came again. This time the color stayed. The freezer doors glowed with that impossible hue, and suddenly the reflection sharpened into something unervingly clear. The store behind me stretched farther than it physically could. More aisles, more shelves, rows that shouldn't exist. The hum deepened until it vibrated in my ribs. Click, click, click. The clicking was faster now. It wasn't mechanical anymore. It sounded deliberate. I stepped back. The reflection followed a fraction of a second later. Except something moved in the deeper aisles. A shape crossing between shelves that weren't in the real store. My stomach tightened. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded strange in the air. Flattened, like it had been absorbed by carpet instead of tile. No answer. The reflection shifted again. Another flicker. Blue. Then the impossible color. And suddenly the depth inside the glass expanded even more. The reflection now showed the entire store, but stretched into a long corridor of repeating aisles that extended far past the back wall. Like mirrors facing mirrors. Except the rows weren't symmetrical. They curved slightly, twisted, and somewhere far back in those extra aisles something moved again. Slow. Watching. The clicking sound stopped. The hum remained. A low, steady vibration that felt like standing next to a transformer. I tried to look away from the glass, but every reflective surface in the store had changed. The chrome security mirror, the soda cooler door, even the plastic cover over the lottery ticket display. All of them held the same impossible depth. All of them showed the extra aisles. My head felt heavy, like my balance had shifted half a step sideways. The colors from the freezer lights pulsed softly, bleeding into the reflections and bending the shadows along the floor. The aisles didn't look straight anymore. They looked slightly tilted. My reflection moved again, but this time it wasn't following me. It was looking past me, over my shoulder. Slowly, I turned. The real store was still empty. Candy racks, magazines, closed doors, nothing there. But in the reflection, something stood in the aisle behind me. Not close, maybe 6 rows back. Tall, still. Its shape blurred whenever the lights flickered blue. But when the impossible color returned, it became clearer. Not fully visible. Just an outline that didn't match the geometry of the shelves. Like it was too large to fit inside the aisle but somehow folded into it. My throat tightened. I stepped sideways. The shape in the reflection stepped too. Closer. The aisles in the reflection seemed longer now. Long enough for it to walk. The hum deepened again and the clicking returned, but now the sound was layered with something else. Breathing. Not loud. Just slow. In. And every time the lights flickered into that color, the shape came one aisle closer. I backed toward the counter. The reflection followed. The aisles behind the shape shifted slightly, like the store's geometry was being rearranged to give it space. The security mirror overhead caught the same view. More aisles. More depth. The thing was almost halfway to me now. My reflection looked pale. Its eyes were wide. But they weren't looking at the same thing I was. They were looking at the freezer lights. The color pulsed again. And suddenly I understood something that made my chest go cold. The reflections weren't distortions. They were corrections. The lights weren't changing the store. They were showing it as it actually was. The aisles weren't ending at the back wall. They never had. The store extended far beyond what human eyes were meant to perceive. Rows and rows of shelves stretching into a space folded behind the walls. And the thing walking through them had always been there. The hum rose into a deep, vibrating chord. The impossible color flooded the glass. For one long second, every reflective surface in the store showed the same image. The endless aisles, the approaching shape, and behind it, hundreds more, standing between shelves that curved away into darkness. Watching, waiting for the lights to flicker again. A customer asked if the night clerk had warned me yet. He said it casually, like someone asking if the coffee machine was working. I was halfway through restocking the gum display by the register. The little cardboard boxes clicked softly as I slid them into place. Behind me, the freezer wall hummed with that steady electrical drone every convenience store seems to have after midnight. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. "I'm sorry," I said. The man stood just inside the automatic doors. They had already slid shut behind him, sealing the quiet of the store again. Outside, the road was empty and dark, the streetlight casting a pale orange cone across the parking lot. He didn't move closer. He just looked at me with a strange kind of patience. "The night clerk," he repeated. "Has he warned you yet?" I straightened up. "I am the night clerk." The fluorescent lights above aisle 3 flickered once. A thin buzz filled the pause afterward. The man tilted his head slightly, like he'd heard something else entirely. "No," he said calmly. "You're the one scheduled tonight." I felt a faint ripple of irritation. "Right? Which makes me the night clerk." The hum of the freezer compressors deepened for a moment, like they were adjusting to a heavier load. The man glanced toward the back of the store where the glass freezer doors reflected long, distorted strips of light. "That's not what I meant." He walked toward the counter then, slow and deliberate. His shoes made soft tapping sounds on the tile. Tap, tap, tap. Something about the rhythm felt too loud for such a quiet store. He stopped a few feet from the register. "You're new," he said. "3 weeks." He nodded as if that confirmed something. "That explains it." A faint click sounded behind me. I turned instinctively. The second register had popped open. The drawer slid halfway out with that familiar metal clatter, the compartments rattling softly before settling still. I stared at it. I hadn't touched it. Neither had he. When I looked back at the customer, he was watching the open drawer with mild interest. "See?" he said. "See what?" "That usually happens first." The fluorescent lights flickered again. This time the flicker ran down the length of the ceiling like a wave. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The hum of the freezers filled the silence afterward. I forced a small laugh. "Electrical problems. This place is old." He said, but his eyes drifted toward the convex security mirror mounted above the snack aisle. I followed his gaze. The mirror showed the entire store in its warped silver reflection. Rows of chips, racks of candy, the coffee station in the corner, and me behind the counter, alone. I looked back at him. "Anything else I can help you with?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached over and picked up a pack of mints from the counter display. He turned it slowly in his fingers. "You should pay attention to the sounds," he said. "The sounds. That's usually how it tries to tell you." Before I could respond, the intercom crackled. Both of us looked up. The little speaker above the cigarette rack buzzed with static. Then a faint click. For a moment, I thought someone in the back office had pressed the talk button. Except there was no back office, just a tiny storage closet. The speaker released a low, hollow hum. Then silence. I felt a strange chill creep along my arms. "That happens sometimes," I said. The customer set the mints back down. "Did it say anything?" "No." He nodded slowly. "It will." A loud clunk came from aisle 4. I turned. A cardboard box sat on the floor near the shelf. Except I hadn't left a box there. In fact, the shelves looked fuller. I stepped out from behind the counter. The man watched me but didn't follow. The store felt different as I walked down the aisle. The hum of the refrigerators seemed deeper now, vibrating faintly through the floor tiles. I reached aisle 4. The box was full of snack bars. Already opened. Half the bars were gone. But the shelf above it was perfectly stocked. I frowned. I was sure those rows had been empty 20 minutes ago. "Restocking," the man said quietly behind me. I turned sharply. He hadn't moved from the counter. "You did that?" "No." The fluorescent lights flickered again. For a split second the store went dim. In that moment the hum of the freezers seemed louder than everything else. Almost like breathing. The lights came back. The box was still there. But the shelf above it was now perfectly aligned, every bar facing forward in neat rows. I hadn't touched them. My chest felt tight. I walked slowly back toward the counter. The customer watched me with an expression that wasn't quite sympathy. More like recognition. "You see why I asked?" he said. I tried to keep my voice steady. "There's no one else here." The convex mirror above the aisle caught my eye again. I looked up. The reflection showed the store behind me. The counter, the soda cooler, the humming freezer wall, and someone standing directly behind me. My breath caught. I spun around. Nothing. The store was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, the reflection showed only me. The man didn't look surprised. "That's the other way it communicates," he said. I rubbed my face. "This is ridiculous." "Is it?" Another click sounded from the register. The open drawer slid shut by itself. Clack. At the same moment, the intercom crackled again. This time a voice tried to form through the static. Not words, just a shape of sound, like someone speaking through water. I felt the hair rise on the back of my neck. The customer leaned slightly closer. "Listen." The static shifted. For a second I thought I heard syllables forming. Pattern. a warning trying to become language. But it never quite did. The speaker popped and fell silent again. The lights flickered once more. This time the flicker lasted longer. Long enough for the store to feel darker than it should have. In the security mirror, the reflection lagged slightly behind my movement when I turned my head. Just a fraction of a second. Like someone else was standing where I'd been a moment earlier. "You should probably leave," I said to the customer. He shook his head gently. "I can't." "Why not?" "Because this isn't about me." The hum of the freezers deepened again. "Low, patient." The man pointed toward the mirror above the aisle. I looked. In the reflection, someone stood behind the counter. Exactly where I'd been earlier. A dark silhouette. Still. Watching. The reflection of me stood in the aisle where I was now. But the shadow behind the counter didn't move. It simply existed. "That's the night clerk," the man said quietly. My throat went dry. "That's not real." He didn't argue. Instead, he picked up the mints again and placed them gently on the counter. "You'll understand soon." "Understand what?" He stepped toward the door. The sensors clicked. The glass panels slid open with a mechanical sigh. Before he left, he looked back once. "The warning was never meant to be spoken," he said. Then he walked into the dark parking lot. The doors closed behind him. The store fell silent again except for the humming freezers. I stood alone in the aisle for a long time. Eventually, I looked up at the mirror again. The reflection showed the store exactly as before. The shelves, the counter, the quiet rows of fluorescent lights, and someone standing calmly behind the register, waiting. The strange thing was, the longer I watched, the more certain I became that the figure wasn't appearing in the reflection. It had always been there, and slowly, almost patiently, the store was rearranging itself, so I would eventually take its place.